Our personal photographs are about our memories. We memorialize special moments and the family and friends we share them with because we want to hold on to those fleeting and precious moments in time. Those images tell a story of who we were, to ourselves, and to the many people that make up our lives. However, there is a lot that's left out of those photographs, allowing those images to reflect an idealized version of ourselves. There are omissions, sometimes accidental, sometimes purposeful, that leave or relegate an important part of the narrative just outside of the frame. Matthew Finley discovered that he might have a gay uncle years after he himself came out to his family. It was a surprising revelation to him to imagine such reality, especially since he had himself faced the challenge of revealing his sexuality to his conservative family. The uncle had passed away years ago, so the burning questions he may have wanted to ask were left unanswered. However, his curiosity of who this man was and how he might have lived led him to create a body of work. Matt collected found imagery and began creating a fictional narrative set in a world that would have embraced this man rather than ostracize him or discriminate against him. The project, An Impossibly Normal Life, creates a world that the photographer himself would have welcomed. The result is a body of work that is tender, vulnerable, and beautiful. This is Ibadi and X, and this is The Candid Frame. Well, Matthew, welcome to The Candid Frame.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, and I'm excited to be here.
It'll be, we've chatted in the years that we've known each other, but this will be the first opportunity I have to have a proper sit down. So I look forward to it. And it's given me a really, an excuse to really kind of go deep on the work that you have. And you've created quite the variety of different projects. I'm quite impressed.
Well, thank you.
You know, one of the things, I was teaching the workshop this weekend, and one of the things, I talk about, especially with the students that I usually have, is about the transition from the singular photograph into creating a body of work, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really evident that that's something that's been happening with your practice of photography. Talk to me about making that transition from just making a single photograph that is pleasing, that you like, into thinking about what you want to say with the camera and with your photographs.
For me, I guess I've always kind of thought that way. I've thought as far as it being a project and a body of work. I've never been a street photographer, so I've always come at it more from a studio/fine art viewpoint. And so I think because of that, it was very natural for me to think about it as not necessarily a story, at least not at first, but as a body, as a bunch of different images saying similar things or telling different parts of the same thing. I don't really know why. I can't really remember exactly why I kind of started that way, but it's always been just the way I approach things as far as photography.
That's a nice advantage to have, because I think a lot of people struggle with that. They get to the point where they become really adept at using the camera, making an effective photograph, but then what now? What next? And, people often struggle with, well, what do I say? What do I focus on? What's the idea that, do I have anything interesting to say? In terms of your early projects, how does you sort of navigate those whole issues? Because even if you're sort of leaning towards that, the whole question of, well, what do I focus on, certainly comes up.
Yeah. Yeah, I was definitely in the beginning. I was kind of lost on where to focus, and of kind of a friend mentor of mine gave me some great advice. He said, what is it that you're most passionate about? What is it that kind of excites you, in your belly, kind of a thing? And I thought about that for a while, and at the kind of the basis level of excitement for me is the beauty of the male form, and so that's kind of where I started. I was like, well, I find this intriguing and exciting and beautiful. How can I capture it? How will I interpret it? How will I capture it? What can I do with it? And that kind of gave me a focus that I was very much needing at the time. And at the same time, I was kind of struggling with, I don't want to be known as just a queer photographer. At the time, I felt that it was kind of pigeonholing. So I was going into that with some wariness. But as I've gotten older and gotten more kind of secure in myself and in my work, I'm proud to call myself a queer photographer. Whereas at the beginning, that was kind of I saw it as a little bit of a negative, or a little bit of a shoebox.
Well, especially when you're delving into, a genre of photography that's already been practiced by a lot of people, queer or not, right? Mm-hmm. And, that thought that comes into the head, well, someone's already done this, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have to really sort of push through that, and sort of answer back to yourself, but I haven't done it. And I think that's really part of the journey, saying yes to yourself and kind of discovering, what do you have to say? How does your own uniqueness as a human being going to color what you create with it, so that it is a unique thing, and rather than derivative of someone else's work, even someone you greatly admired. I see that you experimented with a lot of different approaches. You worked in film, you did ambrotypes, tintypes. Was that part of the journey in terms of using the different methods of photography, not just, traditional film or digital, to try to sort of figure not just the technique and approach by which you created photographs, but how each of those influenced and shaped what you were trying to say?
Yeah, I started with the digital camera, and then through taking a workshop, actually way back when at LACP by Alan Barnes, I took a wet plate class, and in it I met someone who had a wet plate camera. And the place that I was living at the time with my partner the old owner had a dark room in their garage. So it was just kind of coincidence and happenstance that he brought the camera, I brought the darkroom space. So we were able to really dive deep into practicing wet plate photography for a good year together. And that was very exciting. And that kind of opened my eyes to all of the possibilities of photography and the different processes that fall under the photography umbrella. And it really excited me, to have all of those as possibilities. And then I lost that space. We moved, and I lost that space, so I didn't have access to a darkroom anymore. So then I was like, well, what do I do now? And in thinking about ideas I wanted to explore, at that time it was ideas around my coming out, and that kind of fit perfectly with Polaroids, because when I came out in the 70s, obviously Polaroids was a very ubiquitous thing that I experienced then as well, and so Polaroids made sense, also because of the kind of the one-off quality after coming from wet plate. So it just kind of fit together, and so I've kind of continued that trend and the fact that I enjoy that so much about photography is being able to find a different type of photography for each project. Maybe it won't be for each project in the future, but for some of the projects as they come.
Your most recent project, and the one we're going to focus on today, An Impossibly Normal Life, is tied with you coming out in a way. You had an uncle that years after you came out, you found out that he may have been gay or was gay. Tell me about discovering that and what led you to wanting to use what you had learned as a photographer to create a body of work that revolved around his life and how you wanted to use his life as a launching pad for this, for this project.
Yeah. Well, all of my, especially looking back now, all of my projects are very much come from a super personal place. For me, I find that that just seems to be how I come up with where I want to go, what I want to explore. And this project, it was the summer of 2020, and we were all on lockdown, and I think a lot of us were on the computer trying to fill our time. And one of the things I was doing was looking up my family history, my ancestry, because my parents divorced when I was a baby. And I really had little to no connection or, a knowledge of my father's side of the family. So I was online looking things up, and I mentioned it to my mom that, I had been online that day looking stuff up, and her side of the family is also very small and distant, so I don't know even much about them. But as I mentioned this to her, she said, I think your dad might have had a brother who maybe was gay, but he died young. And I came out to my mother like 30 years ago, and she's never mentioned this thought in 30 years. So I kind of felt like I was, hit with a board or something. That just even the thought of someone that close to me and my family going through some of the same things that I went through when I came out. My family was very religious, so it was very difficult. I felt very alone at the time, and so it was shocking to me, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. Even if my mom's memory is wrong, the thought of that just really stuck with me, and I knew I wanted to make some work about it. And I thought about it for a while, what can I do? Do I dress up as my uncle? Do I have other people dress up? All of that felt a little too performy for me. And I've always loved looking at, vernacular, other people's home family photos. And so that just kind of came to mind one day as well. If I don't have his family photos, because he may not even, have existed, if we're going, off what my mother says, I don't have access to his story, yes, maybe I could dig around some and try to find out some facts, but if he's not even, if he wasn't gay, will that discourage me or discourage this impetus that I was feeling? And so I decided to take over his story and kind of become the author of it. And then I thought about that for a while of like, well, if I'm going to author this queer uncle story, what do I want to do? And I knew I didn't want to give him, the closeted, unfulfilled life that so many pre-1970s queer people had because of the way, society was treating them. And I've seen stories like that, and they're very moving, but I didn't want to go down that route. It also possibly could have had to do with our times, the fact that it was 2020. I wanted to focus on something positive. And so I decided to put him in a parallel universe where he could be loved and supported from the beginning. So I started looking online on eBay, actually, for images that could tell this story, images of male affection or something fun and quirky, starting in the 30s, going all the way to the 70s, and kind of cast your average white, dark-haired guy as my uncle, someone who looks like he could actually possibly be my uncle, and just started looking for him in all of the pictures on eBay. Every day I would check. My usual search was just gay vintage photography, and every day I would look and I would find stuff and purchase it, and I started collecting more and more. I decided to give him a blonde husband in the end so that you could tell the two apart, and different things. I came up with story points myself, and then some story points were dictated to me by what I could find. And I initially thought of the project as a gallery show because that's where I've had my experience. And in that aspect, I knew I wanted to kind of interact with the photos in some way. And I thought about that for a long time of, what could I do? Do I draw on them? Do I paint on them? How do I interact with these photos? And I tried a number of different things, and I kept coming back to glitter or shiny glittery elements because it so fit in line with my story, of a happy, vital, joyous. It's such a joyous thing, that reflection and the glitter and the even the essence of glitter being childlike, the way that glitter fits into the queer community and as far as nightlife and drag. So it seemed to fit so perfectly into this project, even though I was worried, are people going to feel this is kitschy or gimmicky? And that was my worry, but I kept going with it, and because I couldn't deny how well it fit. So I started making those, and as I started making those, I continued to collect the images and collect more and more, and then I kind of decided I needed to, for organizing them, I needed to put them in chronological order of his life story. And as I did that, I thought, well, this would make an interesting book, if I could do it kind of like as his photo album, his personal photo album. And that got me thinking more and more about it being also a book project. And so then I started organizing them in like a photo album type layout.
It must have been really fascinating to scouring the internet for these images and, really kind of diving into an unknown history. Granted, you didn't know the people whose photographs that you were looking at, but nevertheless, you were looking at photographs of certain periods of time where the narrative is, as you mentioned, was very difficult for people who were queer, right? But you were looking for images that sort of reflected a greater degree of positivity, love, hopefulness. But to tell me about that process of just looking at the work, not just finding images that sort of fit what you were trying to do, but being purposeful about looking and discovering those kinds of images. What happened as a result of just the way that you saw that period of time?
I think for me, it's a bit of a treasure hunt, and it is interesting to kind of wonder what is actually going on in these pictures. What is the story behind these pictures? I know in most cases the story is not the story that I'm telling, but yeah, you can't help I think that's one of the things that we love about vernacular photos is the possibility of the story that, it's unknowable, but it allows us to bring so much to it. And yeah, there's lots of images of men being, hugging each other or have their arm around each other. And that's one of the things I hope that people take away from this work also, is that it's sad how we've lost that. It's sad how, for fear of being thought of as gay or possibly gay, we stopped being physical with each other, on a purely, non-sexual level. And it is sad. And I'm reminded of how that, was used to be a thing. We used to have no problem walking down the street with your arm around a man, because it wasn't, it wasn't so commonplace that would be, you'd be worried that that's the first thought someone would have, as like it is today.
And in many ways, it's kind of a reflection of an idealized life, not just of your uncle, but one you probably would have liked to have had for yourself. Because as you mentioned, it was very difficult for you coming up, even before you probably came out to your family. Definitely,
yeah. There's definitely that as a part of it. In his story, his parents are super loving and supportive. From his first heartbreak at 15, they're there telling him, you're just loving him and supporting him in his grief, and it's definitely something I wish I could have had that love and support from the beginning, for sure.
How old were you when you came out?
I was about 19.
Okay.
Yeah, once I moved out of the house.
One of the things that's, a challenge for someone who's queer is the idea of being themselves, and that being okay, not just with their immediate family, but just in culture, but just with themselves, right? And but then as an artist, the best work really comes from deep inside, right? And if you've kind of grown up with the idea of that you can't reveal yourself, that you can't expose who you really are because of the ramifications of that, it becomes very difficult to express yourself in the normal day-to-day world. But it's a real thing to overcome when you want to be an artist and you want to say something and you want to use your own life, your own self, as sort of the launching pad for that work. Talk to me about that sort of push and pull in terms of, not just, wanting to be genuine in real life, but being brave enough to put that out there in terms of the work where, you're very vulnerable in terms of people liking it and critiquing it and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I've always, along with what you're saying, I've always felt very kind of self-conscious and very separate in the world. And I think, a lot of that comes from those early queer feelings of being different than all the people around me, and worrying about them seeing that difference. And for some strange reason, that drew me to acting. I think it had to do with being seen in a structured way, and really being with someone, the other actor, in a very connected and intimate way, which I think I desperately wanted, because I felt so unconnected and unseen by or at least not seeing the real me as a young, closeted queer person. So I was drawn to acting and did acting in high school and after. And it was both so great, so thrilling, and so difficult for me. And I bring this up because I feel like once I went down that road and eventually got tired of hitting my head against the floor as far as auditioning and not getting where I wanted to go in acting, I let go of that dream and I had to pivot. And as I searched around for what I could do, because I knew for me that expressing myself was very important to just my life and to living. I landed on photography, and it wasn't much of a challenge for me to take that step from in front of the camera to behind the camera. And so when you ask about vulnerability, I don't find it that challenging to put myself out there. And, in a way, it feels a little less challenging than when I was acting, because when I was acting, it was, you're not doing it right. You're not getting the job. It was very much, it was rejection of me, is at least how it felt. And if they're like, well, I don't understand that photo. I don't, that photo does nothing for me. It feels like it's one step removed in a way in comparison of the two things. So it's actually a little easier for me than the acting was as far as vulnerability. But it is still, especially when, like, I'm thinking of when I went to show this work in Houston, and we had opening night, and you're standing there near the work, and people are talking about it, and it's so funny to basically stand there and be like, "Yep, I'm gay. I'm right." It's like the first thing you're going to know about me because this is my work, and it's funny that's just so foregrounded for me, and for people that are doing subjects personal about themselves. It's interesting.
Yeah, because one of the things that I often see is people have a lot of difficulty giving themselves permission to do work that is very, very personal. They usually think about doing something outside of themselves, but it's usually the personal work that, as uniquely personal as it may be, how incredibly universal it is. Because the genuineness, that vulnerability comes through. You can't help it. You can't keep it from infusing the work, regardless of what the genre of the subject is. And it's lovely to see, because that's something I'm always on the hunt for when I want to look at work, even if I don't have a direct relationship to the experience that the artist or the photographer is using. Somehow I nevertheless connect to it because of that genuineness that exists there. And it has nothing to do with the technique that was used to create it, the paper it was printed on, all that stuff that we photographers get sort of lost in. When the work is there, you feel it. Tell me about... Go ahead.
I was just going to agree with you. I too am very drawn to personal work and emotional work, and more so than other types of photography. I very much like work with an emotional element.
AltadenaPhotographers.org is a homegrown effort to help photographers impacted by the Eaton fires earlier this year, many of whom lost the means to earn their living as image makers. This nonprofit organization has been created by photographers for photographers. It does this by creating a registry where photographers can share what they are in need of and donors to help to replace what they've lost. Monetary donations as well as contributions of equipment are welcomed and appreciated. Find out how you can help by visiting altadena.photographers.org. Tell me about this story that you created about your uncle, in terms of how these, you said earlier that you would find an image and you would do different things with it, but tell me in terms of how, as you got these images, how they helped you to sort of shape the narrative, and how did it change and evolve as you procured more work and then did different things to each photograph?
Yeah, finding them, is the luck of the draw. Whatever happens to come up that day that I can find and afford. There are a group of queer photography collectors, or at least implied queer photography collectors out there with deeper pockets than I have, and they would swoop in, and I missed out on a number of photos I wanted, but I still got quite a few that I liked. So yeah, it's just what I could find, and like I said, it was looking for what I pictured in my mind as my uncle, and trying to find him in different situations, different ages. I wouldn't have necessarily, because this is an idealized life, I wouldn't have necessarily put him in the services, but there were just so many great photos of men together being affectionate in the services that I ended up writing that into his story, that he went into the Navy, because I didn't want to miss out on all of those great photos. And I didn't want his life to be completely without any struggle. So that was something that was determined by what I could find. In thinking about what he might do for a profession, my first inclination was that I wanted him to be a teacher, because one of my best friends is a college professor, and I'm pulling things from my life that end up in this story. And I couldn't find any good photos. There were very few photos taken in classrooms in those years, I guess. I couldn't come across hardly any that fit with what I pictured him in that situation. But I knew I wanted him to be in some sort of kind of service role. So I did find pictures of someone as like a cook. So I have him as a cook who opens a cafe, and then a couple cafes. So that allows him to travel. But little things like that determined, in part, the story. Other than I knew I wanted the basics. I wanted him to have relationships, much like myself, have a number of relationships that didn't work out. The romantic optimist, and then eventually it does. And the new partner comes with a child, so they have a family in the traditional sense, and it's just a very happy, normal story. He doesn't become president, he doesn't fly to the moon, he just lives his life and has a great time doing it. And that is, I think that's kind of exciting and kind of fun. And I wish, one of the wish fulfillments of this project was, I wish I had this uncle, especially when I came out, to tell me, you're going to be okay. You are okay, and you're going to be okay. That would have made a big difference on a 19-year-old me.
What role did writing play, if at all, in putting together a narrative and sort of, making a cohesive whole of all this work?
In the book, once I started working on the book, I didn't have the glitter elements to kind of to be a part of the story because they don't photograph at all, really. So I leaned into the photo album aspect and, realized I could enhance the story with the captions. So the captions help carry you through the story and fill it out a little bit more. And then I've also included 3 personal letters. And I wrote the first one from my uncle to his parents when he's in the Navy and kind of homesick and lonely. And then I asked my partner to write one from Uncle Ken's partner's perspective on the night of their wedding or the night before their wedding. And then I asked my best friend to write one who's a mom. She writes one from Uncle Ken's parents to him when he's 15 and has his first heartbreak. So those are in there to kind of help fill it out a little bit as well. Other than that, there's not a ton of writing. There's a little poem at the end that I wrote, and a little afterward, but not a ton of writing. I do want to leave a little space, for people to bring something to the images, but I didn't. But I kind of wanted to lead them along. I didn't want it all to be up in the air because, I didn't want it to be misunderstood that it's a positive story. It definitely. I have a what's the word I'm looking for? A vision for it.
You're sort of showing the work and having it exhibited. Tell me about that process for you. What did you do in order to get, find an audience for the project?
I really like portfolio reviews. I went to Filter and showed the work kind of for the first time in person. I'd shown it online at a few reviews, and because the prints have a glitter element, it's a little harder to get unless you're in person. So it was important for me to take the work to show in person. So I went to Filter and got a very nice response from people, and that Houston came next after that, not long after that, and then the Griffin after that, and then I applied for Center Santa Fe Awards and got the personal award, which was amazing and very unexpected. So I got to go back to Center Santa Fe and do the reviews there, and then I got the LGBT plus award from Carmel Center for Photography in Carmel, and that show will open in about a month.
One of the things it's said about when you go to portfolio reviews is know what you want from it. So when you went to each of these, what was your want when you were going to each of these tables to share the work?
I really just wanted to get the word out there. I wanted to get the work out there. I wanted to connect with the person. This project's been really interesting in that people respond to it with their own stories, which is really nice. More than once, I've had someone say, my uncle was gay. We didn't find out till after he had passed. Or, my great aunt lived with a woman her whole life, but we never really, we didn't know until I was told much later. So it's so great to hear the stories that other people have in relationship to this work. And I just knew that getting the work in front of them in person was important, because it just didn't seem to translate as well, over the Zoom So, I wanted to get it out there. I wanted to get shows. There's never any guarantee that you're going to get anything. I've learned that. I've done plenty of reviews where, nothing necessarily tangible came of them. But I always try to think of them as planting seeds. You're out there planting seeds, and every now and then something will sprout up. It might not be right away. It might be a year later. But that's the only way things are going to grow, is if you keep going out there and planting those seeds.
So tell me about the journey of taking this work and turning it into a book.
I submitted it around quite a bit, and a friend of mine hooked me up with Jennifer Yaffe of Yaffe Press, and she really responded to the work. But at the time, she couldn't take anything on. She was very busy. So she referred me to a friend of hers, William Bowling at Fall Line Press, and he responded well to the work. So we decided to work together, and we've been working on it for since November? No, probably earlier than that, but for quite a while, and it's been good. It's been good. The publishing industry seems to move very slowly.
Yes.
I have to remind myself they are shepherding, a bunch of books while I'm just concentrating and thinking about one. So I want things to move faster, but it's good. And all of it will depend on the Kickstarter, really. I'm, being a photographer that is not doing a lot commercially. I don't have money to fund it myself, unfortunately. So it all will rest in the hands of the Kickstarter community. And if I can be successful at that, then there will be an actual book come fall.
Well, the whole crowdfunding thing is really a necessary component now of photographers who want to publish a book, unless they have, they're a big name or something like that. And, we have plenty of examples, people who we know who've gone through this journey in terms of making it happen. Tell me what you sort of have learned about crowdfunding and what you need to do in order to sort of make that happen, other than just posting something on a website.
That's hard to answer because I don't know if I'm going to make it happen yet. I know it's a lot of work. to compile all your lists and just making the Kickstarter page is a lot of work, and trying to make it look as professional and as nice as you can. And we'll see. My fingers, toes, and eyes are crossed. I don't know how. I can't say I know how to make it successful until unless we talk again in a month and a half to see how it went. But I'm gonna be pushing it. I'm gonna be emailing everyone multiple times, hoping that they pre-order the book and check out the rewards.
But there's obviously a lot of nervousness about pulling it off, but I think that making the leap is really an important part of this, regardless of what the outcome is, because it's a lot of people don't even get to this point because of fear and insecurity and self-doubt. And the fact that you're putting the work out there and you're saying this is what I want to do with it. And it's work that you've already experienced how it resonates with people when they see it. And I think that one of the things that helps, I know that helps me in terms of what I do with my work, is knowing that there's there's somebody out there who cares about this stuff, right? It's not everybody, but there are enough people out there that care about what I'm doing that makes it worth making the effort to make it happen. And that sort of has always sort of helped me, especially during those moments where I'm awash in sort of self-doubt and insecurity and second-guessing myself. I've not done a monograph. I've not done anything close to what you've done with this and other projects. So I've got great admiration for you, for everything that you've done thus far, and even in this moment right now, even though you don't know how it's turned out, it's very inspiring. Which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, because I think a lot of people will hear this, and they'll see themselves in your journey, right? And
thank you.
I think it's important to share.
Thank you so much. I one of the reasons that I am so passionate about doing this, is because I feel like of all the work I've done, this particular project, has the possibility to change someone's mind, to comfort someone. I feel like I keep coming back to a picture of a young person who feels alone, and coming across the book. And, even though it's imaginary, I think there's comfort there. I've found comfort there, and people that I've talked to have found comfort there as far as, a history. It's not a real history, but it is a positive history. And I think that counts for something. Because there's so little queer history that, that isn't negative, isn't, sad and depressing. There's a big hole because it just wasn't recorded, and out of fear. And so I feel like in some teeny tiny way that this project fits in that, tiny bit of that hole, and it could give some hope or some comfort to some person. And that's what makes me excited about getting it out there. That's what makes me work as hard as I've worked to try to make this happen, is because I feel like it could do that.
How did working on this project and building this narrative around these photographs and these people that you saw in these images make you change, or maybe not change, but sort of give you a different perspective in terms of your own journey? I think in that way of history, the history sense, I think that it brought me some comfort. Even though I've made up this story, I feel connected to these photos and to these people, these characters in this story. And that has made me feel just more like I have more of a history behind me, more people in my corner. And I just want to share that. I want to share that feeling with people who don't have that. And there's a lot of joy in the project, and I feel, especially right now, our government is really trying to stomp on our joy and stomp on the queer community and the trans community, and I don't see that getting better anytime soon. And I feel like there's so much joy in this project that it brings me comfort. I don't know. I know I said that already, but that's one of the biggest things I think that I've gotten from this project. Tell me about the title, An Impossibly Normal Life. I love the title, but I was wondering how that popped into your head.
The title is a combination of a few things. One of the first things was my husband. He's a writer, a screenwriter, and he's like, "You want something catchy? You want something dramatic?" And so, I came up with like Impossible as being my dramatic, but at the same time, his life isn't dramatic. It's very normal. It's very, I didn't want to use the word average, but it is, in that it's just a calm, happy life. And it's a life that I wish all queer people had access to, that they could just live their life and not worry and not stress and not have been closeted or have been having to hide, just have a normal life. And so the Impossible, fit well with this wasn't possible, obviously, in our past. But there's a lot of hope there still.
So how can people find out more about the project and support it? And, and beyond supporting it, what more help do you need in terms of spreading the word?
I just need this Kickstarter to succeed. The Kickstarter will launch on April 22nd, and will go for 30 days. And you can find it under the title of the book, An Impossibly Normal Life. You can find me on Instagram and find the Kickstarter page that way. However you get there, I hope that you will consider pre-ordering the book. There's also rewards like a print with glitter on it. There's also, I'm doing a limited edition of 5 albums. So they're reproductions of Uncle Ken's album, which is the original album that I kind of book mock-up that I made. These are 5 reproductions where I've reprinted all of the photos, inkjet prints, and put the corners in and glued the embellishments into each one. So each one is very handmade, and each one will be slightly different. And about 50 pages, and that's the big collector item. So yeah, please support the project and share it, and let's make it happen and get this book out into the world. I'm excited at the possibility of getting it into some libraries. I don't know in these days how hard that will be, but I will try. And I'm excited to get it into LGBTQ plus spaces and organizations. I have a target list. We're having a buy one, give one in this Kickstarter, where you can buy one, and then the second one we will take to one of these organizations that wants some copies of the book after the Kickstarter. And so I'm excited to do that and to get it out into the community and hopefully all over.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to support it and to contribute in spreading the word. So best of luck with it.
Thank you so much.
My last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover, explore on their own, and it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
I'm going to say my friend Michael Young. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work. He's gotten a lot of attention for some work called Hidden Glances, and it's such a brilliant idea. It's one of those ideas you're like, I wish I had that idea. He has taken gay magazines, gay nude magazines from around the time that he came out, and he's cut out the figure on one page, so you see the page behind it, and it makes really interesting, sometimes abstract kind of almost collages, but it's just basically two images with some part of the top one missing. And it's super nostalgic for me, because we're close in age, having those similar, influences. And it's just so simple and just such a great project. I really love it.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your time on this Tuesday afternoon. It was great to have a chance to talk with you.
Thank you so much, Byronex. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks to Matt for sharing his story and his work, and you can help him in his effort to make An Impossibly Normal Life into a book by supporting his Kickstarter campaign. You can find out more about this book and Matt's other work by visiting mfinleyphoto.com. And if you're a fan of our work, you can write reviews on whatever service you use to listen to podcasts on, and share a favorite episode on social networks, be it X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Remember to use the hashtag #TheCandidFrame. You can support us financially via my family's GoFundMe page and Patreon, and links for both will be in the show notes and the website. And if you want to make a one-time donation to the show, you can do so by visiting buymeacoffee.com/TheCandidFrame. We've relaunched our newsletter using Substack. Sign up today and receive regular updates on all things related to TCF. And if you can't find every episode of the show on whatever service you use to listen to podcasts on, download the Candid Frame app for Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity, it's free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker. And this is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame.